just have to. Where's that? Oh, is there one back there? Long-term clock. Well, the calculus is at 2. This is the oversight. Right. No, you're good.
Testing, testing, testing. Mic check 1, mic check 2. Testing, testing, July 7, 2016. Testing, testing. You're at 1:30? Oh, that's.
sure that's the most updated copy.
Great guy. Committee will come to order. The Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee hearing on the cost sharing and reduction investigation is underway. Welcome today. We are joined by the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Brady, and I'm going to yield to Chairman Brady for an opening statement, and then we'll hear from Mr. Lewis. Chairman Brady.
Thank you, Chairman Roskin, for holding this important hearing. And today we are releasing substantive findings from our 17-month investigation into the administration's unlawful funding of Obamacare's cost-sharing reduction program. The reason why our investigation took 17 months is because the administration obstructed the process and simply refused to give the facts to the American people. So we are here today to fulfill our constitutional responsibility to conduct oversight and reinforce Congress's constitutional power of the purse. We're not here to litigate whether the administration acted unlawfully in funding Obamacare's cost-sharing reduction program. That was settled in May, when a federal judge ruled that the administration had no constitutional or statutory authority to fund this program. As our Constitution makes clear in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. This means the executive branch may not spend a single taxpayer dollar without an explicit appropriation by Congress. Our founding fathers entrusted Congress with the power of the purse, not the White House. While current law authorizes the cost-sharing reduction program, Congress has never provided an appropriation for it. The administration knew this, and they didn't care. They broke the law and spent the money anyway. This is stealing from the American people, plain and simple. To date, the administration has unlawfully spent $7 billion of taxpayer funding that was never appropriated for the CSR program. Let me repeat that. The administration unlawfully spent $7 billion taxpayer dollars for this program. So in February of 2015, our committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee initiated a joint investigation into how all this was put into motion. The administration has met us with unprecedented resistance at every turn. Numerous times we called for agencies to turn over critical documents, and numerous times we were denied. We were also asked administration personnel to come speak with us in person about how things transpired. Again, we were denied. At the beginning of the year, I finally said enough is enough. I issued subpoenas to compel the testimony of agency officials and legally require the administration to turn over requested documentation. This was one of my first acts as chairman. It was the first time in years our committee has subpoenaed the administration for information needed to fulfill our oversight responsibilities. The lengths we've had to go in this investigation clearly underscore the unprecedented level of obstruction by this administration. In fact, all the agencies represented here today still have not complied with our subpoenas to turn over relevant documents. But these lengths also demonstrate how seriously we take our duty to oversee the administration's actions. We will not be deterred by stonewalling. Thanks in large part to the outstanding work of Chairman Roskin, Chairman Upton at Energy and Commerce, and the oversight teams of our two committees, we have uncovered critical information about the administration's unlawful actions. And it is because of this hard work that we now have a chance to deliver real findings to the American people. This morning, along with the Energy and Commerce Committee, we released staff report and comprehensive staff report on what we have uncovered thus far. The report, which can be found on our committee's website, details how the administration decided to fund the CSR program illegally, and it provides an in-depth look at their unprecedented obstruction of this investigation. Our investigation in this matter is far from complete, but today represents a major step toward providing Americans with the transparency and accountability they deserve from their government. Again, thank you to Chairman Roskin and all the members of the Oversight Subcommittee for your hard work and dedication. Yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say good morning and welcome to the witnesses. I begin by thanking each and every one of you for being here. Thank you for your service. In particular, I would like to thank the Commissioner for joining us once again. The Commissioner is an honorable man who has faithfully served his country. I would like to quote the former RS Chief Risk Officer who said, he's not only a phenomenal leader, but one of the best managers we ever had in government. Mr. Chairman, I must tell you, I must say that I'm very disappointed with today's hearing with the topic. I'm afraid it is nothing more than another attempt to roll back health care reform. Almost 2 years ago, House Republicans filed a lawsuit against the Obama administration over the funding of the cost sharing reduction program, better known as CSR. This program simply helps low-income people afford medical costs. Today, over 6 million Americans have been helped. Today, over 6 million have better access to care. To be clear, the lawsuit claims that this program needs annual funding from Congress. The administration argues that it does not. Mr. Chairman, this is a lawsuit between two branches of government. Both parties agree on the facts. So I respectfully ask, what is the point of this hearing? Why are we placing public servants in the middle of an ongoing legal case? Some may argue that we are here because the work of the committee is being blocked. This is not the case. This is not true. For the record, there are 4 government officials representing 4 different agencies here today. The administration has voluntarily provided 13 current and former officials for interviews on this matter. 13. Not 5, not 6, not 10, but 13. The lawsuit is still pending in the courts. It is ongoing. Yet here we are. Mr. Chairman, there's real work to be done. There are real issues that need to be addressed. This is not it. This is not the one. There may be others. We should not waste the time and energy debating how to tear apart the good part of health care reform. We should not be trying to roll back what help people make ends meet. We can and we must do better. And we can do better. We are called to be leaders, to be headlights, and not taillights. Mr. Chairman, I deeply believe that this subcommittee can do good work on behalf of the American people. I'm hopeful that we will return to that work very, very soon. Thank you, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Let me attempt to answer some of the questions that you've laid out. And before I do that, I want to thank Chairman Brady and Chairman Upton for the work that they've done in driving this investigation. And from my point of view, that work has paid off. The ranking member just a minute ago said there's real work to be done, and I agree with that. He gave us an admonition, and the question was, what's the point of the hearing? Let me describe, I think, what the point of the hearing is. But there's also a notion that when you're doing good work, and we all want to do it, there's got to be clear lines of authority. We've all heard that phrase, good fences make good neighbors. And what we've seen going back and forth between the executive branch and the legislative branch are areas where the legislative branch, at least a majority in the House thinks so, feels encroached upon. And it's not as if this is just a parochial thing. We're talking about these constitutional themes that this entire subcommittee matters. Now, believes matters. How that manifests itself, I don't obviously speak for the minority, but these things do matter, and it's not just esoteric. So, as we all learned, we've got this system of checks and balances. And there's three co-equal branches of government, and they're meant to restrain one another. That was the nature of the architecture that the founders had, and they looked at these as essential safeguards to protect the American public from their own government. In our hearing today, we're going to be looking at how this administration has run roughshod over two key authorities that the Constitution gave to Congress. Didn't give to the administration, didn't give it to the courts. The Constitution in Article 1 gives it to Congress. And as Chairman Brady discussed a minute ago, the first key authority is Congress's power of the purse. And as we all know, the Constitution says this: no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. That means that the government may not spend any taxpayer money unless Congress passes a law that says it can. The American people elect members of Congress, and here in the House, we're up for election every 2 years, and we're all too familiar with that process, and that's the process by which the American public adjusts the dials. They make the choices at the ballot box. That's manifested in who is seated in this Congress, and the Constitution says those people who are sent by those representatives get to choose how the money gets spent. Other people don't. Congress does. And it also means that the president cannot take money from one program and spend it on another just because he wants to, or just because he thinks it's a good idea. Money is specifically appropriated for individual programs. And it seems to me that this administration has ignored those constitutional restraints. So if you set aside the, quote, good intentions by which the administration is cloaking itself, and you begin to project out and think, well, what would a future administration be able to do if we allow this to stand? Can a future administration say they're going to do what they perceive to be a good idea, regardless of what the Constitution says? And I would argue that that isn't a good thing. The Affordable Care Act established many programs. One of them was the premium tax credit, which helps people pay for their insurance premiums. Congress wrote the Affordable Care Act to allow the administration to pay for that program from an account held by the Treasury Department. That account is paid for with a permanent appropriation. So the tax credit account always has money. In this hearing, we might refer to that as Section 1324 account, or the premium tax credit appropriation. Okay, so far so good. Permanent appropriations are unusual, though. Congress pays for most programs with annual appropriations, meaning each year the administration has to ask Congress for money to pay for those programs. Well, the ACA set up one of those programs that requires an annual appropriation. Let me repeat that. The ACA set up the program that requires an annual appropriation called the Cost Sharing Reduction Program, or the CSR program. Cost-sharing reduction program requires insurance company to reduce co-payments, deductibles, and other out-of-pocket costs for qualified people. Under the CSR program, the government is supposed to help offset the insurance company's costs. Let's get that clear. Who's the beneficiary here? It's the insurance companies. The underlying statute says the insurance companies have an obligation. This program is a subsidy for insurance companies. It's not a subsidy that's going directly to poor people. It's a subsidy that's going to insurance companies to offset their costs for the CRS payments. But unlike the premium tax credit program, Congress did not give any money in the ACA for the CSR program. Instead, each year the president's supposed to ask for money from Congress, and the Congress can decide whether or not to give the executive branch that money. That's the architecture of the ACA. And in 2012, the Treasury Department wrote the President's Office of Management and Budget a memo saying exactly that. And in 2013, the President initially asked Congress for $3.9 billion to pay the cost-sharing reduction payments to the insurance companies in his FY 2014 budget request. But then something strange happened. In July of 2013, the HHS Assistant Secretary of Financial Services called the Senate Appropriations Committee staff and asked them to take that line out of the President's budget. How unusual. Then in the fall of 2013, OMB created a memorandum explaining why the administration could use the money Congress appropriated to pay for the premium tax credit program, that permanent appropriation I was just talking about, to pay for the cost-sharing reduction program using a permanent account to pay for an annual expense. OMB shared that memo with top officials in the administration to get their approval, including, and think about this, the level of granularity of this account is getting the attention of these people, the General Counsels of Treasury and HHS, as well as the Attorney General, Eric Holder, who all had to sign off on that plan. Now, around that same time, the IRS's Deputy Chief Financial Officer was confirming that the administration was squared away to make these payments, which were set to start being paid in January of 2014. At first, he was under the impression that the payments would be made from an annual appropriation to HHS, but then he learned HHS had withdrawn its request. HHS explained to him that the payments would come from the premium tax credit account. The deputy CFO had two big concerns. First, how would HHS make payments from a Treasury account? He wanted to be sure that an audit trail would be in place to later trace the accuracy of the payments, but then he became concerned about a bigger problem. Were the funds in the premium tax credit account even available for these payments? Because not only does the Constitution prohibit the administration from making payments unless they have an appropriation, there's a law called the Anti-Deficiency Act, and of all things, it makes it a criminal violation for a federal official to pay for a program if Congress has not appropriated funds for that program. Helping the IRS avoid Anti-Deficiency Act violations was one of the Deputy CFO's primary responsibilities, and so he did the right thing. He raised red flags to the IRS's Chief Risk Officer, David Fisher, the IRS's Chief Counsel's Office as well. His warning set off a chain of discussions at the IRS, and by early January of 2014, IRS Chief Counsel William Wilkins reached out to the OMB General Counsel, Geovette Washington, to discuss these issues. She then set up a meeting at OMB for 7 IRS officials to come to OMB and look at the memo they'd prepared about the CRS funding. So, on January 13th, 2014, IRS lawyers and Chief Risk Officer and Chief Financial Officer and several other officials went to OMB in the old Executive Office building. And there, these top IRS officials were escorted into an OMB conference room. Ms. Washington was at the meeting along with several of her subordinates. The OMB lawyers passed out copies of the memo. Ms. Washington told the IRS officials not to take notes on it or to take a copy with them. Think about that. No notes, no copies, which several participants, according to our investigation, found to be very strange indeed. The OMB lawyers left the room and let the IRS officials read the memo. Then the OMB lawyers come back in. Ms. Washington talked about how she was excited to have had a chance to brief Attorney General Eric Holder about this issue and that he had approved the memo. Chief Risk Officer David Fisher and others raised concerns that the payments would violate the Anti-Deficiency Act and the Constitution at that meeting. According to Mr. Fisher, OMB offered a weak explanation for why the payments would be okay. Back at the IRS, the officials briefed Commissioner Koskinen about the OMB meeting. Mr. Fisher told Commissioner Koskinen that he was worried about the Anti-Deficiency Act violations. Our investigation has revealed, however, by the time the officials met with Commissioner Koskinen, the decision already had been made. At the meeting, the IRS officials saw copies of an action memorandum directing the IRS to make certain CRS payments from the premium tax credit memo. Secretary Lew had already signed off on that memo. Administration officials who constructed this plan and moved ahead with it chose to fund the CRS payments from money that Congress designated for other programs. In other words, all of those individuals chose to hijack Congress's power of the purse and make those violations in violation of the Constitution and in violation of federal law. To this day, they've made more than $7 billion in CSR payments without congressional authorization. That's the first thing. The second thing is this, that we'll talk about here today, is Congress's power to oversee the executive branch, which is not mitigated, which is not restrained, which is not dampened by a pending lawsuit. Congress's oversight authorities are critical to ensuring the administration is transparent to the American people. That is our job. Congress has run into unprecedented obstruction during the course of this investigation. It took the committees a year and a half to gather the facts surrounding the administration's decision to make these illegal payments. And even now, OMB, Treasury, and HHS are in violation of subpoenas issued by the Ways and Means Committee. The administration has argued that because the House sued the administration to stop them from making these payments, the Ways and Means Committee and Energy and Commerce Committee shouldn't be investigating the facts surrounding the decision-making. The House's lawsuit only focuses on a narrow legal issue. The House and the administration have agreed that the court didn't need to do any of the fact-finding to reach its decisions. That's why we need to do the fact-finding here. The committees want to know who, why, and how the administration decided to embark on this unconstitutional course. While our oversight, while the prerogative of the American people, as manifested through them adjusting the dials in their periodic elections, has been run roughshod over, it's our responsibility to determine these facts. And the fact that there's pending litigation has no influence on our inquiry there. And we will stipulate further that it's going to be the courts that are going to make the ultimate constitutional decision, but already the lower court has decided as I've described. Instead of accountability and transparency, the administration threw up roadblock after roadblock. But despite those and through persistent efforts, we've learned a great deal. We look forward to learning more from the administration, why they decided to make these payments, why they worked so hard to prevent Congress from learning these facts. And we're here to listen, we're here to learn, we're also here to defend the prerogative of the American public. We'll hear just from one panel. Our panel is the 4 witnesses: the Department of Health and Human Services Acting Deputy Secretary Mary Wakefield, Treasury Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy Mark Mazur, IRS Commissioner John Koskinen, and Office of Management and Budget Senior Advisor Michael Deach. Commissioner, welcome, and you've got 5 minutes, and let's start with you. Thank you for coming today.
Chairman Roscom, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the subcommittee, as always, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee. This hearing marks the 35th time I've testified before the Congress. During my 2.5 years as IRS Commissioner, I've developed a deep respect for this subcommittee and its primary role in overseeing the work of the IRS. We do not always agree, but you raise important questions, and your requests and suggestions often lead to improvements in our service to American taxpayers. I'm scheduled to lead the IRS for another 16 months, but I serve obviously at the pleasure of the President, and a new President can always ask me to step aside sooner. But as long as I'm Commissioner, I'm committed to working with you in pursuit of our common goals and helping you fulfill your important oversight role. The IRS has been charged with implementing the tax-related provisions of the Affordable Care Act. These efforts include supporting the integrated system of federal subsidies that help millions of American families afford health insurance coverage purchased through the federal and state health insurance marketplaces. This system consists of interrelated subsidies, the premium tax credit, and cost-sharing reduction payments. The health insurance marketplaces, which are overseen by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are responsible for determining whether an individual is eligible for APTC payments as well as the CSR payments. The IRS provides the marketplaces with data and computational services for use in their determinations about eligibility for financial assistance. CMS certifies the payments using the information it receives from the marketplaces and notifies the Treasury Department's Bureau of Fiscal Services, which disperses the payments to insurers. The IRS role in this process involves providing administrative support to ensure proper funding of and accounting for the advanced premium tax credit and the shared SR payments. The source of funding for these payments is a permanent and definite appropriation to the Secretary of the Treasury. The IRS manages and administers this appropriation on the Treasury's behalf for various types of payments, including CSR payments, premium tax credit refunds, and advance payments of the premium tax credit. At the beginning of each fiscal year, the IRS ensures that sufficient funding has been transferred into an allocation account for CMS to use in obligating and dispersing payments, including those for CSR payments. The IRS manages unobligated funds in the account at the end of the fiscal year and performs financial reporting as the parent of the allocation account. Because the payments are reflected on the IRS's financial statements, the IRS coordinates closely with CMS throughout the year to ensure that CMS has effective controls over the integrity of the payment process and amounts. The IRS continually monitors those controls to mitigate any risk to financial reporting. This includes an independent third-party assessment performed at CMS for the IRS to share with the Government Accountability Office for the financial statement audit. The IRS has received a clean audit opinion from the GAO on its accounting and financial reporting with regard to the cost-sharing reduction payment for the 2 years the program has been in operation. Before the first CSR payments were made in late January 2014, the Treasury Department determined that it would, through the IRS, administer cost-sharing reduction payments pursuant to the Affordable Care Act under the Section 1324B appropriation. Thereafter, we proceeded with our activities to support implementation and operation of the CSR payments. Chairman Roskin, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the subcommittee, as well as Chairman Brady, this concludes my statement, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Wakefield,
Chairman Roscom, Ranking Member Lewis.
turn on your mic.
Chairman Roscom, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the committee, I appreciate this opportunity to testify on the Department of Health and Human Services implementation of the Affordable Care Act, including the provisions of the Affordable Care Act that require the executive branch to make advance payments of premium tax credits and cost-sharing reductions that help to defray the cost of insurance coverage. The Affordable Care Act is expanding access to care for millions of Americans who would otherwise be uninsured. It improves the quality of care for people no matter how they get their insurance, while also slowing the growth in healthcare costs nationwide. Now, we have an estimated 20 million Americans that have gained coverage since the Affordable Care Act's coverage provisions have taken effect. And cost-sharing reductions are a key part of providing more Americans with access to quality health care that they can afford. This financial assistance helps low-income Americans to see their doctor on a regular basis and also to afford their out-of-pocket health care expenses. The administration has faithfully implemented the Affordable Care Act, including provisions that require the executive branch to make advance payments of premium tax credits, as I indicated, and cost-sharing reductions that help to defray the cost of insurance coverage. Both the advance payment of premium tax credits and cost-sharing reductions are fully funded by the Affordable Care Act through the appropriation provided under Section 1324. As you know, the House has filed a lawsuit against HHS concerning the payment of cost-sharing reductions. This issue continues to be litigated, and for additional information, I would refer you to the briefs that have been filed in the case. At HHS, we remain committed to cooperating with the committee to provide information that it needs to fulfill its legislative responsibilities, while also taking into account the significant confidentiality interests of the executive branch. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and with your staff on important matters related to the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mazur?
Morning. Chairman Roskin, Chairman Brady, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to testify regarding the cost-sharing reduction program under the Affordable Care Act. Since the enactment more than 6 years ago, the ACA has significantly reduced the number of Americans without health care coverage. 20 million people have gained health insurance coverage because of the ACA. The uninsured rate is the lowest on record. Moreover, the ACA is making health coverage more affordable and accessible for Americans across the country. About 85% of marketplace consumers benefit from tax credits to make their coverage more affordable, and they pay an average premium of $106 per month after tax credits. And since enactment of the ACA, we have seen the slowest growth in health care costs in 50 years. This reduced growth rate in costs benefits all of us. For insured individuals and families, the total cost of health care covered by our plan consists of a combination of payments to insurers and direct or indirect payments to health care providers. The payments to insurers take the form of monthly premiums that the insurers charge. The payments to health care providers, collectively known as cost-sharing payments, reflect the fact that insurance plans typically do not pay the full cost of covered health care services. Rather, plans require insured individuals to pay a co-payment or co-insurance for visits to health care providers. Further, some plans require an individual to pay a specified amount out of pocket, known as a deductible. A principal goal of the ACA is to make health insurance more affordable for low and moderate income Americans. To achieve that goal, the Act established an integrated system of federal subsidies that lower insurance premiums, and reduce out-of-pocket costs for millions of eligible individuals through the premium tax credits and through the cost-sharing reductions. Premium tax credits, as you know, subsidize monthly insurance premiums for eligible individuals. Those credits are available to eligible individuals with household incomes from 100% of the federal poverty level to 400% of the federal poverty level. And that reduces the cost of insurance purchased through the ACA's marketplaces for low and moderate income households. For individuals eligible for the premium tax credit and who have household income up to 250% of the federal poverty level, the ACA also helps with cost-sharing expenses, such as co-payments and deductibles, for plans obtained through the marketplaces. The permanent appropriation in 31 U.S.C. Section 1324 provides funding for all components of ACA's integrated system of subsidies for the purchase of health insurance, including both the premium tax credits and the cost-sharing reduction portions of the advance payments. Since January 2014, the executive branch has been making advance payments of premium tax credits and cost-sharing reductions to issuers of qualified health plans as provided for in the Affordable Care Act. I understand that some members of this committee disagree with and will have questions about the administration's legal conclusions that 31 U.S.C. Section 1324 permanently appropriates funding for cost-sharing reduction payments. The administration's conclusion about those payments are the subject of active litigation brought by the House of Representatives. So for further information on the legal justifications, I'd refer you to the briefs filed in that case. We welcome the opportunity to continue our work with this committee and with all of Congress to achieve the objectives and goals of the Affordable Care Act. Thank you.
And just to put a finer point on it, Mr. Mazur, your invitation was for further legal justification. We're going to stipulate that is not the nature of the inquiry. We're looking for the process justification. So thank you for the opportunity to inquire there. Mr. Deitch?
Chairman Roscom, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Is it on? Better? Yes, sir. Great. I'm Michael Deitch, and I've had the privilege of working for the Office of Management and Budget twice over the last 20 years. In my first position from 1996 to 2001, I served as Associate Director for General Government and Finance. Since returning to OMB last year, I've served as Senior Advisor to the Director and have been delegated the duties of the Deputy Director. In this capacity, I advise the Director on development of the President's budget and on appropriations activity. Every day, I'm reminded of the excellent work performed by OMB staff, and I'm honored to be part of this agency and proud of the mission it performs. The Office of Management and Budget assists the President in developing and executing
Mr.
its
Deitch,
policies.
could you, I'm just getting some requests. If you could move a little bit closer to the mic or pull it closer to you, that'd be helpful.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
A core part of OMB's mission is working with every component of the executive branch to develop the President's budget proposals, submitting the President's budget to Congress, working towards enactment of the budget, and overseeing the executive branch's implementation of enacted appropriations. OMB ensures agencies develop, express, and implement policies and practices in accordance with the President's priorities and with statutory direction. OMB is committed to improving the effectiveness and efficiency of government programs. As part of its mission, OMB works with other executive branch agencies to ensure the successful and ongoing implementation of the Affordable Care Act. As my colleagues have noted, the ACA has expanded access to care for millions of Americans who otherwise would be uninsured. It has improved the quality of care for people no matter how they get their insurance, and it has slowed the growth in health care costs nationwide. Cost-sharing reductions have helped improve the affordability of coverage options for eligible consumers. Moving forward, the administration will work to build on the progress that's been made to further reduce the number of uninsured Americans, improve health care, and slow health care cost growth. OMB respects Congress's oversight role in examining the Affordable Care Act and will continue to work with the committee to respond to its requests for information. OMB has a long history of working collaboratively to respond to congressional inquiries, and will continue to work with this committee to accommodate its requests for information. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you all for your testimony. Chairman Brady?
Chairman, first, let me ask unanimous request that the staff report on this investigation be submitted for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Secondly, Congress is always about distraction. And so let's knock down a couple of them right away. The distraction is that we can't be doing oversight because there is litigation involved. Our founding fathers didn't write in the Constitution the power of the purse for Congress unless a lawsuit is filed. Our Democrat colleagues did recognize that when they led this committee in oversight, and Republicans who lead this committee today recognize that constitutional power of the purse and oversight trumps litigation every day of the week. Secondly, this is not about health care. In my view, the Affordable Care Act is failing 2 years in advance. But that's not this issue. It's about whether any White House, not just this one, any White House can ignore repeatedly the explicit directions of Congress that no dollars will be spent on a specified program. That's what is at the heart of this. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you ought to be interested in this report and in this power. Because at that point, there's no need for legislative branch. Any White House can just pick or choose which programs to fund and which to ignore. Finally, there is still, this investigation will continue till it gets to the complete truth. We have sent subpoenas for documents to every agency represented here today. Every one of your agencies are out of compliance with those subpoenas. You've not asserted a single legal privilege that protects these documents, so you have absolutely no reason not to hand them over. So, Mr. Major, beginning with you, Treasury is months overdue on document subpoenas. Yes or no, do you intend to comply with subpoenas by the end of next week?
Mr. Brady, I understand that your staff and the staff of Treasury Department have been in contact to determine how best to respond to those subpoenas. I expect those will be ongoing, and hopefully they'll be a success.
You know, we've been very patient in trying to be accommodative to it, but it is time to deliver those documents. Ms. Wakefield, HSS is also months overdue on the document subpoenas. Does HHS intend to comply by the end of next week?
Sir, we have provided information and documents, and we will continue to work with the committee to review the committee's requests.
Mr. Deitch, O&B is also months overdue on the document subpoenas. We've only asked for one from you. One.
We're committed
it
to.
Shouldn't be that hard. So does O&B intend to comply by the end of the week?
We're committed to providing the information sought by the committee, and we look forward to working with the committee to find a way to accommodate its interests.
I'm going to take that all as a yes for each of the agencies. In my view, the level of obstruction has been astonishing. This is a fairly direct issue. The administration should not be hiding the ball on this. And the sooner we get to this and to the public scrutiny of this, the better all around. And I would encourage you to do that. With that, Chairman Roscom, yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. My question is for the panel. Please explain what is the cost sharing reduction program that was established by the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you for the question, sir. The cost sharing reduction program was established by the Affordable Care Act to help to defray the costs of health care coverage for individuals and families, particularly, not particularly, but specifically for those that are low income, up to about 250% of the federal poverty level. And in fact, what it does is it allows the defraying of costs that are out-of-pocket costs. So those costs that an individual would need to pay as part of a copay or a deductible, different from the advanced premium tax credits that focuses explicitly on helping to offset the cost of premiums. So this is the place, the cost sharing reduction component that for low-income people can have such a significant impact. That is, it can be the difference between a mom who feels comfortable taking their child to an urgent care center because they know in advance that the copay or the deductible is not going to be prohibitive in terms of their ability to pay. So point is that this provision in the statute is really designed to help individuals offset or defray their costs so that they can get access to doctors, nurse practitioners, when they need access to health care. It's a really important part of the Affordable Care Act, particularly for those populations that are lower income.
Does this program benefit the average person, the average Joe?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the program benefits over 6 million individuals as of about March of this year. That's the data that we have, that there are millions of individuals that are able to access physicians and other healthcare providers without what has historically been a barrier to getting health care pre the Affordable Care Act. That is that out-of-pocket cost that people would have to pay. And so about 6.4 million people, about that number, are currently benefiting from this provision.
That's the number that are participating in the program at this time?
About approximately 6.4 million individuals across the United States, in states and congressional districts all over, that are benefiting from this program as of this year. And prior to the Affordable Care Act, it wouldn't be uncommon to see individuals having to choose between getting health care coverage or paying rent or being able to pay for food. Because of the associated costs of coinsurance, of deductibles, as I mentioned, and copays. So this removes that barrier for individuals that are often working families, but families that are low income. It's a really important provision to help ensure that people have access to health care.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Dr. Wakefield, just for the point of clarification, you're conflating two issues. The premium tax credit directly benefits individuals. The cost-sharing reduction program benefits insurance carriers. That's the direct beneficiary. I'll yield to Mr. Meehan.
I think that gets right to the issue, and this is the whole heart of what is disturbing about the way these representations are being made. Let me just start with, Mr. Koskinen, could you please get Exhibit 7. You will see it up on the screen right here. And I don't know if you're able to read from the screen, but you are able to read from the documents in front of you. Would you please read the yellow parts of the section 1324 that has been cited by just about everybody today in the testimony?
I cannot quite see that, but which?
Well, let me read it for you then so we don't waste time. Necessary amounts are appropriated to the Secretary of the Treasury for refunding internal revenue collections as provided by law, including payments of, and then we go to 34B, the section that is, disbursements may be made from the appropriations made by this section only for, and then it highlights, number 1, refunds for the limit of liability, but number 2, refunds from the credit provisions of the Internal Revenue Code. So that's the authority for the credit provision reimbursements. Is that not correct?
That is the authority, yes.
So from that, you make those tax credit reimbursements. Are you able to choose to do anything else? Can you give any of the people there the ability to have other kinds of benefits? Let's say they all need cars to get to. Can you give them cars out of that account?
No, we basically rely on legal advice as to what's included.
Well, no, you rely on the legal language, correct, of the statute.
Well, actually, the language, you know, there's a piece of litigation going on about what the language means.
Well,
our role is to administer the act. And we made, as you know...
Where is there ambiguity here where, because I'm looking at the part that articulates tax credits as being specifically given, but where is the part in the appropriation that says that you're entitled to do cost sharing?
Well, as you know, we've not been involved directly in that discussion. We're not involved in the litigation. It's
Well,
not.
then let me ask Ms. Wakefield, where is the language that allows you to do the cost sharing?
With all due deference, I'm not in a position to enter into that legal debate about whether.
No, I'm not asking you, Mr. Koskinen, thank you. I'm asking Ms. Wakefield now. Thank you. You've told me the authority for what you are enabled to do. I'm asking Ms. Wakefield where she believes she has the authority to do that now.
I have not done an analysis of what's included or
Ms.
not.
Wakefield, did I address you with a question, please? Please answer my question. Thank you, Mr. Koskinen.
It is our interpretation that the Affordable Care Act requires the executive branch through this section to make advance payments for the payments of premium tax credits.
This is a process question. Can you point to me where you're entitled to do that?
Sir, I cannot. I'm not an attorney or a lawyer. I can say that for the specific interpretation of that language, I'd refer you to the briefs that have been filed by the Department
Ms. Wakefield,
of Justice.
we're talking about a process here, not the briefs in a legal filing. You can't refer me to it because it doesn't exist. Where in that language does it say you are entitled to make payments for cost sharing? Read it.
What I can say is that our interpretation of
Interpretation
that
of
section,
what? What are you interpreting? What is, tell me, Mr. Mazur, what are you interpreting? Show me the point that says cost sharing is entitled to be paid for. This is not a complex issue.
Mr. Mayor, we're not trying to make this hard for you, but if you look at the Affordable Care Act as a whole, there are cost-sharing payments that are authorized in the program. They're an integrated part of the program with the premium tax credits, and the legal briefs, as has been pointed out, filed, make that point of how the interpretation is done.
Where do they point to the authority? This is a process. No, Mr. Mazur, you're in front of me.
Yeah, I refer you to the legal briefs to take a look at them. They're
Well,
publicly available.
why don't you refer to the legal briefs and tell me where they are?
Because I don't have the legal briefs in front of me at the moment.
Why did you
sir.
come not prepared to answer the very question that relates to the point that each and every one of you made, relying on this specific provision, and yet completely unprepared when I pointed out the specific language that does not give you that authority?
Sir,
Speak to the issue that it does. You have each used it as the basis upon which you have justified this decision. It clearly does not exist in statute, and arguably, Mr. Koskinen, you appreciate. People could be criminally prosecuted for spending money they're not authorized to spend. I'm not suggesting we go there.
sir, obviously,
Where does this authority emanate from?
sir.
Mr. Crowley.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First of all, I just want to clarify a point that the chairman, Mr. Roskin, made, that the CSR program benefits insurers, that it's misleading. That's what he alluded to, that it somehow doesn't benefit the insurers. CSR directly benefits the patients by reducing out-of-pocket costs at the point of care. To make an analogy, I know my Republican colleagues love the Medicare Advantage program. The federal treasury pays the insurance company, is that correct, Ms. Wakefield?
Yes.
Not the patient, correct? In a similar way in which the CSR is operated as well, is that correct?
Yes.
But no one would say, I don't think my Republican colleagues would say, that the Medicare Advantage program doesn't benefit patients. So I think really have to be under a rock not to understand that the 6 million people who are getting a benefit today that they didn't have before the Affordable Care Act, and are getting that benefit because of that subsidy of the cost-sharing reduction program that helps them afford that coverage. Is that not correct, Ms. Wakefield?
Yes, that's correct, and it does so using a sliding fee scale. That's correct.
I think it's a shame we're here today, and shame and sham are very closely related. I think it's a sham as well. The majority claims today's hearing is somehow needed to, quote, investigate the implementation of a program that helps people with health care costs. but their minds were made up well before they embarked on this fool's errand to find wrongdoing where none exists. They started out believing that what was happening was illegal. They made that determination, and then they filled in the blanks. I've been wondering why this hearing was needed, since, after all, my Republican colleagues are engaged simultaneously and are in the middle of a lawsuit on this very matter, which I know Mr. Major and others have alluded to. But the majority kept insisting that this hearing is needed to hear from all of you today, taking you away from important work. And then this morning, hours before the hearing even started, the majority issued their own partisan, biased report full of, in my opinion, false conclusions. And in fact, we were asked not to, my understanding is when the report was given to the committee, minority side, we were asked not to, the ranking members asked not to share that report with anyone in terms of open process. I guess they were so eager to hear from the witnesses, they couldn't even wait for you all to testify before they came to their conclusion and claimed the wrongdoing. So it's clear to me this hearing today is only about attacking the Affordable Care Act and, in many respects, embarrassing the witnesses and the administration, and interfering with the public servants, you all, who are helping to implement this act. But let's take this opportunity to clear some things up. I'm troubled by the changes the charges the majority has thrown around, that the administration has somehow not cooperated with the investigation, as my colleague, Mr. Lewis, has referred to. The administration has made available 13 former and current employees to talk about the implementation of the health reform law's cost share program. I also understand the administration has made these individuals available despite being sued right now. The House Republicans, over the very same subject matter that they're engaged in, and now are simultaneously holding this so-called investigation. Let me just ask a couple of questions, Ms. Wakefield, if we could. Are you aware of the fact that not a single Republican on this committee supported the Affordable Care Act?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Would you be surprised if I told you that not a single member of the Republican caucus supported the Affordable Care Act? Would you be surprised if I told you that? Don't have to answer that. Would you be surprised if I told you that the Republican caucus has tried 60 times to overturn the Affordable Care Act?
No, I wouldn't be surprised at that.
Do you know that they actually have attempted 60 times to overturn the Affordable Care Act? You know that, is that correct? So I think we have an understanding where they're coming from here in terms of this morning. They had a predetermined outcome. They determined what you did was wrong, and then they just filled in the blanks in this report. I think a first grader could do that, but they probably get an F from their teacher for trying to do something just like that. And I think the American people understand what this is. It's a sham. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Just for the point of clarification, the administration stipulated in the lawsuit that has been frequently cited here that notwithstanding the cost-sharing reduction program, it's the insurance carriers that are on the hook. So my declaration earlier is without repute. Mr. Holding?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mauser and Commissioner Koskin, preparing for this hearing, discussed the issues. I'm going to assume that you've talked with people at IRS and Treasury who've been involved in funding the cost-sharing reduction program, correct?
No, I've not talked to anybody at the Treasury Department about it. As noted earlier, David Fisher's deposition discusses the time we had a discussion about this. I'd been at the IRS about a month, and going to Congressman Meehan's point, the question was raised in terms of what was the authority? Did we have the authority to administer the plan?
Well, let me ask you a little bit more specifically. So, Commissioner, do you know Charles Messing?
Pardon?
Charles Messing.
Charles?
Messing.
I do not know Charles Messing.
He's the former IRS CFO.
I'm not aware of him.
You don't know him? So, Mr. Messing, who's the former IRS CFO, gave this document here. I think it's Exhibit 1, so you put it on the screen. If you all could turn in your binders to Exhibit 1. Each of you has it in front of you, and each of you will need to look at it. So Mr. Messings, the former IRS CFO, gave the document, which is Exhibit 1, to the Treasury Inspector General when they asked for information about the premium tax credit program. Mr. Mauser, do you know who Michael Briskin is?
I do not.
I'm Mr. Mauser.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's Mr. Mazer.
Mazer, excuse me.
Yes, and I do know who Michael Briskin is.
All right. He's the Treasury Special Counsel to the Assistant General Counsel for General Law, Ethics, and Regulation. And the metadata of the document that we're looking at show that he was the last person to edit this document. Now, the document shows that Mr. Briskin, a Treasury Counsel, was the last person to edit the document, and the Treasury wrote this memo on July 2012 to OMB, and it talks about whether HHS could use a Treasury allocation account to make the advanced premium credit payments. So if you're taking a look at the highlighted passage there in the document, this passage is contrasting the funding, the appropriation Congress gave for the premium tax credit program to the lack of funding for the cost sharing program. Mr. Mazer, would you read the highlighted passage, please?
It is not possible for me to read that highlighted passage.
You have it in your document
Is
there.
it highlighted in there as well?
It's the last paragraph of Exhibit 1.
The last paragraph of the memo?
Yeah, Exhibit 1.
Sure, it says, the memo as written says, such a reading, of course, would not be applicable to the largely parallel language in Section 1324C3. There is currently no appropriation to Treasury or anyone else for purposes of the cost-sharing payments to be made under that section. However, this does not suggest that Section 1412C2A should be read to require certification of payments by Treasury.
All right.
Such a reading would be equally inapplicable to Section 1412C3.
All right, I'll stop you there. Mr. Mazer, are you aware that in July of 2012, Treasury's legal department wrote this memorandum stating that the account the administration currently is using to make the cost-sharing reduction payments was not available to make those payments, and that there was no appropriation for the CSR payments? Were you aware of that in July? Were you aware of that?
Sir, I was not aware of this memorandum until today, till you brought it up. I've been in my current job since August 2012 when the Senate confirmed me.
Okay. Mr. Deitch, do you know who received this memo at OMB? That is Exhibit 1.
I do not.
Do you know who would know who received that memo at OMB?
I do not. I arrived at OMB last year.
Well, would you be able to find that out for us and report back to the committee?
I will take that back, yes.
Thank you. So based on this memo, OMB was aware that Treasury believed that there was no appropriation for CSRSs in 2012. Would you consider that to be accurate, having looked at this memo and what we've read here, Mr. Mazer?
I don't know. I don't know who at OMB received or read the memo.
Mr. Mazer?
So I look at this as one input into a decision process, not dispositive by itself, and I haven't seen this memo before today.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rangel.
I didn't follow that line of questioning, but is there any question that the four of you believe that you're following constitutionally the letter of the law as relates to the Affordable Care Act? I mean, have you any problem with that you're trying to follow the law? And in the course of reaching a conclusion of how the law should be enforced, from time to time there are disagreements, I assume, among lawyers, and that's what lawyers are for, to make certain there's disagreements so that we can get paid. So the fact that there's not unanimity in memos does not distract from the unanimity of your testimony today, does it, in any way?
Correct.
Do you have any doubts at all about the positions you're taking as it relates to the constitutionality and legality of the Affordable Care Act and how we are funding it right now?
I have none.
And obviously, the court is a separate branch of government, and you, I, and Republicans and whoever will be relying on them to determine who's right and who's wrong. What I don't understand, and I hope some of my political friends on the other side of this aisle can explain, is that, and I hope I don't get in trouble with Reverend Lewis, but it just seems like
Well, that'll be good trouble.
every moral concept that civilized countries have is you're supposed to take care of the darn sick. That you have a commitment to take care of the sick. And there's no reason for me to believe that members of Congress don't have that same compassion. And I do believe before the Affordable Care Act that you received calls from people saying that my dear relative has cancer and the insurance company claimed they had a precondition and they're not going to pay it. And I've always was successful and say, you don't mean to tell me that the premiums weren't paid, you're not going to give the service. And we had all hoped that the federal government could take that responsibility off of us legislatively and have a program that a sick person can either get care or prevent themselves from getting sick. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about how a person is eligible for care. And if they say that you need insurance to do it, you're talking about how they get the resources to pay for the insurance. But if they don't have it, they can die. They can absolutely die if they don't have the money to pay for care. How could we? I can see how you can disagree with Obama and Democratic majorities, but for God's sake, if you think we're doing it wrong, you should have an alternative to do it right. But you just can't say that people are not entitled because you don't like the method in which it's being funded. So I just hope that as we go through these things, that the voters would recognize that somebody cares for how they are being treated in terms of their need for health care. And if they don't like the way we're doing it, they certainly should come up with a plan to say we can do it better. I don't think that's asking too much, since our officers know how many people, because of the inability to pay these doctors and hospitals, die because they can't do it. So I want to thank all of you for doing your job. We write the laws, you interpret it, and they take us to court. I wish somebody would say, if you don't do it this way, at least show us how these people can get health care. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rangel. Let me accept your invitation as I look over to recognize the next member, and the explanation to explain it from one of your political friends. And we are political friends, and I am on the other side of the aisle. It goes like this. Here goes the thinking. Number one, you use a great phrase. You don't mean to tell me. And so we've got this same thing going on. You don't mean to tell me that you've got to violate the Constitution in order to get this done. You don't mean to tell me that you're going to come before Congress and say one thing and go to a federal court and say another thing. Come to Congress and say this is about poor people, and that's the representation here, and that's what is gotten your attention, and I respect that. But let's be really clear. The administration in the lawsuit stipulated that the insurance companies are going to do this regardless. They're going to get the money regardless. In other words, this is a subsidy for insurance companies. And so that's the scandal. And if this is such a great idea, than to go back to Chairman Brady's point, come clean and say, here's how we came to this information. Here's these witnesses. And to characterize this group of people, frankly, as being helpful and forthcoming, they're coming up with new legal standards here that don't even exist in the law. Heightened interest and confidentiality, something like that, that's a complete fiction. That's made up. That's nonsense. So that is the part that animates me, and I'm inviting you to be animated by that as well. Because when it all comes down to it, your point is, look, people need help. Our argument and what we're trying to drive today is, yeah, and there's a way to do it. And don't tell me that you're telling a federal judge one thing and you're coming before the Ways and Means to hear another thing. Let me yield to Mr. Smith.
I just want to join with you. If you got to sue somebody, sue the insurance company. I'll join in with that suit and encourage the Democratic leadership. But you don't take away the right and the ability of a sick person to get well. That's wrong.
Great point.
It's morally wrong.
And Mr. Rangel, they have admitted in court that the insurance company is on the hook. I yield to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow after that conversation. Mr. Deitch, when Congress writes an appropriations law, what does that law have to say in order to legally give money to that program?
I'm not a lawyer. My understanding is that an appropriation has two components. One is directing that a payment be made, and the other designating the source of funds that are used. That's exactly how I think most members of Congress believe that when you do appropriations, that's what's necessary. Ms. Wakefield, does HHS ever decide to take money from one program and give it to another for convenience?
Sir, we follow the expectations.
Wait, was your answer no, sir, at the beginning? The mic wasn't on.
Yes.
Okay.
That was my answer. We follow the expectations that are laid out in the statutes that are associated with the programs that HHS has responsibility for implementing. And so our actions derive from our interpretation of the statutes, and that's the basis for our implementation of our programs.
Your actions rely on the statutes.
That's correct. On our
And based on the appropriations, that's how you distribute money. And if you distributed money any other way, that would be against the law, correct?
So our actions are based on our interpretation of the statute, and that is associated with authorizing language as well as with appropriations language.
So if appropriations are passed saying money will be dispersed out of this fund for this purpose, if you disperse it any other way, that would be a violation of that appropriations. Correct? Yes or no?
We interpret the statute.
It's a yes or no answer. Is it yes or no?
Well, sir, we interpret the statutes.
So it depends, is what you're telling us? Just yes or no, or depends?
Our responsibility is
okay, let me read this letter, okay? In a letter, Senators Cruz and Lee, this was a letter to Senator Cruz and to Senator Lee from Secretary Burwell. And it says, to improve the efficiency and the administration of the subsidy payments made pursuant to the ACA for insurers, as well as the federal government, the cost-sharing subsidy payments are being made through the Advance Payments Program and will be paid out of the same account from which the premium tax credit portion of the advance payments for that program are paid. Secretary Burwell did not give a statutory basis for using the account. She just said it was for efficiency. Mr. Deitch, have you ever seen any other situation in which the executive branch used money appropriated for one program to pay for a different program and justified it solely because of the convenience or for efficiency?
Congressman, thank you for your question. In the present instance, the administration made the payments based on the existence of an appropriation.
Have you ever seen Congress make an appropriation determined based on the efficiency or based on their convenience?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you say them again?
Let me repeat the question again because you didn't answer it. Mr. Deitch, have you ever seen any situation in which the executive branch used money appropriated for one program to pay for a different program and justified it solely because of convenience or efficiency?
I have not, and as I mentioned earlier in the present instance.
Today you
it's our
have.
belief-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to read from a letter to the editor of Newsweek from the Cook County President, Tony Preckwinkle, as she responds to Newsweek magazine's March 4th, 2014 article, How Obamacare May Lower the Prison Population More Than Any Reform in a Generation. And she says Cook County, home to 130 municipalities, including the city of Chicago, is the second largest county in the United States. As president of Cook County's Board of Commissioners, I'm charged with overseeing an overburdened criminal justice system, which includes one of the nation's largest jails. I commend Newsweek for recognizing the vital connection between Obamacare and safer communities. How Obamacare may lower the prison population more than any reform in a generation, March 4th, 2014. In November 2012, Cook County was granted a Medicaid waiver that has already allowed us to provide health insurance to over 86,000 low-income residents, including 2,600 formerly detained individuals. For the first time, many of these people are now receiving mental health and substance abuse treatment supported by preventive physical health care in their communities. These efforts mean those with criminal records are less likely to return to our jail, while others will never make the first trip into detention. When a young person struggling with depression gets treatment instead of access to street drugs, it puts him or her on the path to a productive life. We can realize lower rates of incarceration and recidivism in 2014 by seizing the opportunity Obamacare has created. Deputy Secretary, do these individuals receive the benefit from shared cost reductions?
Thank you for the question. Individuals with an income between 150 and between 100 and 250% of the federal poverty level are eligible for the benefits associated with cost-sharing reduction, the cost-sharing reduction provisions of the statute. And it is a provision that is really important for low-income individuals and families because it helps to offset and defray the costs that are out-of-pocket costs when individuals access health care services. So certainly, no doubt, some of the individuals in the population you've just described, sir, would be probably eligible for that particular benefit.
And if we did not provide care for them, would they have any other recourse, any other place, any other source, or any other way to do anything except, as Representative Rangel suggested, die?
So those out-of-pocket costs can be a barrier and can be a barrier to individuals getting access to health care services. Individual families will make decisions on occasion about whether or not the money they have available would be used to pay for a deductible, for example, or a copay to see a doctor, to have their child taken care of, for example, or that money would be stipulated in that family's budget for use for some other purpose. So choices would, historically, before the Affordable Care Act, for families, many families, would have needed to have been made, especially those families that are, well, the families that are lower income families. So those are tough choices that impacted individuals. And I can tell you, as a nurse, as a registered nurse, it's really important from my vantage point that people are able to access care when they need it. And this provision helps to remove that, what has been a barrier for many individuals to access health care when they need it because of their low-income status and limited funds that they have to pay for health care services versus some other choice.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Secretary, I want to focus in on some of the decision-making processes that happen at the Department of Health with this issue. Are you aware that in fiscal year 2014, there was an appropriations request made to the Senate for the reimbursement of the cost-sharing payment?
It is my understanding that there was that in the fiscal year 14 budget, there was a request for appropriations to fund the cost-sharing reduction provisions.
So that request was made by the administration to the appropriations process to have it funded through the appropriations, discretionary appropriations process that we deal with here in Congress, correct?
I believe that's correct.
I think you're accurate on it. Then 2015, that appropriations request did not seek reimbursement for the cost-sharing reduction payment. Isn't that correct? For the same appropriations process?
I believe that for fiscal year 15 in the President's budget that the conclusion was made that the executive branch was required to make cost-sharing reduction payments using permanent appropriations and sort of fund CSR.
So isn't it fair to say that in 2014, the administration requested an appropriations request for this cost-sharing payment? 2015, they did not make that request for the appropriations payment, and they went a different route. They went down this mandatory spending, this provision that we're relying upon that's in the lawsuit. That's where we're at, correct?
As I said, the conclusion that was drawn for fiscal year, the conclusion that was made, it's my understanding, for fiscal year 15's President's budget was that the executive branch was required to make appropriations available to fund the cost-sharing reduction provisions of the law.
Because the appropriations was denied in 2014. The other question I have then for you is you have in your testimony asked us to look at the briefs to get to the some of the details here. And are you aware that in the briefs, the court asked the question of the administration lawyers, what caused you to withdraw that appropriations request from 2014 to 2015? Are you aware of the court asking that in the litigation?
No, I'm not aware of that.
They did. They did. And then the administration's lawyers responded to that request of the court and said, the reference of withdrawal is to O&B's submission of the fiscal year 2015 budget, which did not request a similar item. Defendant's counsel did not intend to suggest that there was a separate formal withdrawal document and apologizes for being unclear on that point. That was the representation of the administration to the court. Now, are you aware of an Ellen Murray?
Yes, she's the Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And are you aware she made a phone call to the Senate Appropriations Committee asking them to withdraw or to not provide that cost-sharing payment?
I was not in the position that I'm currently in as the acting deputy secretary during the fiscal year 2014, fiscal year 2015 budget process that you just described.
So you weren't there, so I kind of
wasn't there, so I can't speak to conversations.
I anticipated you saying that. So, but the question is, the record's very clear. Ms. Murray made that phone call. She made that phone call to the Senate Appropriations Committee to withdraw that request. I think that's indisputed as to what happened there. The question I'm going to ask you is, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to come clean. Do you know who directed her to make that call?
Sir, I wasn't in my current position. At that time, I was the administrator for the Health Resources and Services Administration. I have no knowledge of a call that was made, or I have no knowledge of a call that was made.
You ever had any conversations with anybody at the Department of Health about Ellen Murray's phone call to the Appropriations Committee?
I have no knowledge of a call that was made by
Have you
Ellen
talked to
Murray.
anybody at the Department of Health about that phone call?
No, I have no knowledge of that call.
Okay, so this is the first time we've ever had a conversation about Ellen Murray's phone call with me here today.
I have no knowledge of that call, Congressman. I have.
No, not that you don't have knowledge. Have you had a conversation other than our conversation right here today? Have you had a conversation in the Department of Health about Ellen Murray's phone call to the Appropriations Committee to withdraw the request?
In coming into the committee today, Congressman, I was informed that there was the possibility of a call. Somebody mentioned in passing to me, Congressman, that there was a conversation that had. I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch it exactly correctly. I was, I think, informed that a conversation had been made by Ellen Murray with an appropriations staffer. I have no knowledge of the
Who did you have that
details
conversation
of
with?
that
Who
call.
told you that? Who told you that?
Oof.
In preparation for your committee
Yes,
testimony?
that's right. So this is in preparation for the committee.
Who told you that?
I'm trying to remember.
You don't even remember who told you that in preparation for the committee?
So we do a lot of
today?
yeah. So Congressman, we do a lot of prep with different individuals coming into the.
So who did you prepare with in preparation for today's testimony?
Sure. So I prepared.
Give me names.
Excuse me.
Give me names.
Yeah. So I prepared with individuals from different parts
Names.
of the. Well. With the individuals that I prepared with included Kevin Barstow. So bear with me, please, because this is over the course of the last few days. Hannah Bumstead. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object. The member's time is over. I don't think he should be harassing.
Oh, this isn't harassment, Mr.
Well, I was just letting her complete her statement, and then I was going to
Yeah, and sorry, there are just a number of individuals. So in preparation for this meeting, Congressman, I'm not trying to obfuscate. I'm actually trying to remember the names of the individuals.
That's the
there
problem.
There are a number of them.
You obfuscated to the court, and you're not being transparent.
Mr. Chairman,
I got it. Gentleman's time has expired. Dr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always like to come to a session of the Theater of the Absurd. It's an old period in the theater in which things are very strange on the stage. What I find interesting in the Theater of the Absurd today is that we have Mr. Koskinen here as a witness. Now, he's the guy that this committee and this Congress and the Republican side is trying to get rid of or dismiss as the IRS head. Everybody has been, but he's good enough to come here and testify here. So I'm glad to see you here, Mr. Koskinen. I appreciate your public service. Now, what's the Theater of the Absurd here is that he sits as an administrator in which people argue in front of him about what decision he should make, about how money should be spent, or how money should be spent in a particular program that's in law. And there's disputes. I sat in a deposition and listened to some employee of the department say that there was a big dispute, and then he went on to say that Mr. Koskinen made the decision that 99% of the people would make. That is, to pay out these payments. The witch hunt that's going on here is really about discrediting the IRS. It's not, or because the Speaker himself has said we care about poverty. We really care. We Republicans are really worried about poverty. This was a program to help poor people get health care. It was to give them the ability to buy and deal with some of the problems that come up for folks that don't make $170,000 a year like we do. Everybody on this dais does not have problems with health care payments. But there are a lot of people out there in the world who do. And we put a program together, and instead of coming in here to fix it, if it was an appropriation, then fix it. That'd be a simple bill, almost a consent calendar bill, if people were serious about fixing it. But this is not about fixing it. This is about a witch hunt for somebody in the IRS who sent a letter or made a phone call or did something. Now, I find it very hard to see how a public administrator, have you ever had any decision, Mr. Koskinen, before you that did not have people on both sides of it?
As a general matter, the only decisions that come to me are where there are close questions or arguments on both sides of the question.
And what's the process you go through in dealing with those kinds of things?
Well, as Mr. Fisher noted in his deposition, from the day I started, the meetings involved here were in my first month, I've always said that at any meeting, everyone in the meeting should feel comfortable and in fact obligated to raise any questions or concerns they have. And in fact, Mr. Fisher and I were setting up an enterprise risk management program where my goal was to have every IRS employee view themselves as a risk manager who had not only should feel comfortable raising concerns or issues, but really has an obligation to let us know. So my way of running meetings is everybody in the meeting should feel comfortable that if they have a question or an issue to be raised, they should be comfortable raising it, and in fact, that's their obligation to raise it.
And then when that process is done, you've listened to all of them, you make a decision.
That's correct.
And the buck stops at your desk, more or less, is how it would be put in Harry Truman's terms, huh?
That's correct.
Now, has it ever been a decision you made where you think, well, I could have gone the other way, but maybe I should have gone the other way? Have you ever questioned yourself afterward?
Well, if you run meetings the way I've been running them for my 45 years career and you see all of the issues before you, as a general matter, I've not then felt that I had to make second choices or concern about that because I've heard from very smart and able people, both sides of the issue. There's usually a consensus that develops, and that's what happened in this meeting, as Mr. Fisher noted. By the time we got through analyzing it and looking at the legal advice we had, the consensus was the IRS was authorized to go forward with its administrative responsibilities, which we did.
Thank you for your service as the director of the IRS.
Thank you.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Part of the challenge in coming into Act 3 of the theater is that you missed the two previous acts. And what point I made in my opening statement was that this decision was largely made at the time the commissioner showed up at the IRS. So this was basically a done deal. Let me also point out that the commissioner is the only person who accepted our invitation to be here. He was invited, he accepted the invitation, and here he is as a witness. The other three witnesses are here basically by threat of subpoena, and it was like passing a kidney stone to get these people to come here. So the commissioner is in very much a different posture, and that was very clear in my opening statement. Let me yield to Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to follow up on Mr. Reed's questions to Mrs. Wakefield. Did you know that the administration's lawyers in the ongoing litigation regarding this matter wrote that the administration did not withdraw its request for the appropriation, but later on, when in the process of this preparing for this in our investigation, Ellen Murray in fact said that she was directed by somebody, that's unclear who that was, to call Senate Appropriations and say that we no longer needed the money, the administration no longer needed the money. Were you aware of that?
No, sir. I have no knowledge of the circumstances that you just described.
Okay, well, so if the administration's lawyers in the course of this litigation said that there was no withdrawal, but in fact Mrs. Murray did actually call Senate Appropriations and withdraw, that would be somewhat of a misrepresentation to the court, wouldn't it?
I'm unaware of the context or the specific circumstances that you've just described. Sorry, I was not in my position at the time of
Thank you, Mrs. Wakefield. I want to talk to you, Mr. Mazur. You know, we work for the same people, the American people. And President Obama promised the American people the most transparent administration in modern history. But experience has proved exactly the opposite. With a string of lies and scandals and cover-ups in the IRS and in other areas of government, from Lois Lerner and Jonathan Gruber to things that you said to this Congress, Commissioner Koskin, to Susan Rice, to Hillary Clinton, Eric Holder, James Clapper, it goes on and on. It's just not surprising that the American people have lost faith in our government. Mr. Mazur, I'm trying to understand. I'm looking at your memo of January 15, 2014, which I assume you have in front of you. And I'm trying to understand how your justification for using 1324B, and what I don't understand is why you can't clearly answer that question, why it has to be confused, duck, and cover. I want to know, this memo, you prepared it, right? Your name's on it.
Correct.
How many memos do you do, action memorandums for Secretary Lew? How often do you do that?
I've probably written hundreds of memorandums to Secretary Lew over the time that I've been there.
Whose initials is that where it says approve there?
Excuse me?
The initials where it says approve on the memo? Is
Those
that
would be,
Secretary
those would be
Lew's?
Secretary Lew's initials, yes.
That's Secretary Lew's? All right. When it gets down to the part of justifying why you believe that the payments are appropriate under Section 1324B, that entire paragraph is redacted. Why would that be redacted?
Really, that's
is there some privilege that you want to assert? Is this a top secret matter of national security? Why would that be redacted? Why wouldn't you share that with the Congress and the American people? We both work for the same people. All we're asking for is what President Obama promised, and that's transparency. Why would that be redacted?
Sir, I agree we all work for the same American people. I also think that the Treasury Department has been working with your committee to give you the information you need.
Oh, really?
To do oversight.
So here we sit a year and a half later, and we still don't know the justification in this memorandum for why you believe these cash payments should be taken out of 1324B. You say you've been working with us, but yet you redact the very crux of it in this memorandum. The most important paragraph is taken out of this memo. Why would you hide that from us? Why is it a constant stream of scandals and cover-ups and obfuscation? Why is that?
Sir, first, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on the scandals part. I don't think there's been a set of scandals in this administration.
Well, I mean, the Congress had to take the unprecedented action of suing the administration to get to the bottom of this because of continued ducking, covering, hiding, obfuscation. Why does it why do we have to go to the courts to get these answers? Why are we sitting here today, a year and a half into this investigation, and you still won't lay out the specifics of your memorandum of January 15, 2014, which the public has the right to know this information? Why is it that we continuously are faced with these lies and cover-ups?
Sir, the House of Representatives is taking the unprecedented action of suing the administration over this political disagreement. And that's where it stands right now.
Political disagreement? We don't even know what we're disagreeing about because you won't even tell us your position.
Mr. Marchant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the panel today if any of you consider the tax refund account a slush fund.
Sir, no, it's used for the appropriate purposes.
Okay, so is there any precedent? Is there any other time in history where the tax refund account, and Mr. Koskinen, Mr. Commissioner, you certainly don't view that tax refund account as a slush fund that can be tapped for political reasons?
Absolutely not. We would only run the program with.
I think that every member of the panel can agree that that is not the intent of that fund, and all of you should be concerned that's the way it was actually, in effect, used. The administration had a real clear choice to come to the Congress and ask for that money. It's in the legislation. It allows the administration or Health and Human Services come to the Congress, get that appropriation so that they can make those payments to the insurance company. Is that correct? Yet they chose not to do it this year. Why? Well, I can tell you, back in my district, Obamacare is one of the most unpopular programs the federal government has ever printed. And it's my opinion that the administration knew that if it came to Congress for that appropriation, it was going to have trouble getting it. So, Ms. Wakefield, if those insurance companies don't get that amount of money, what do they do to recoup the money?
Congressman, it is our intent that through the litigation that
not litigation, just from a practical aspect, don't the insurance companies have to raise their premiums if they do not get that reimbursement?
Sir, it is our view that the administration will prevail in the position that we've taken in litigation.
I'm talking about just from a practical, not from a practical standpoint. If those insurance companies don't get that amount of money, they're going to have to raise their premiums to recoup their costs so they don't go broke. So, my opinion is that there was no appropriation sought. The money was available in this fund. It was readily available through looks like a very complicated process. They got everybody on the same page and got this money, tapped this money, and sent it to the insurance companies, primarily so that the insurance companies would not have to go up on their premiums, so that the program would not be disclosed earlier than it's being disclosed this year and next year. Where in Texas, I think Blue Cross Blue Shield has said that in some areas they're going to have to go up as much as 60% on the premiums just so they don't go broke. So this was all political. This was all done for political expediency to keep the insurance companies from going up on the premiums so that the Obamacare program would not appear to be insolvent and not working and going broke. So is there any precedent in government for these kind of funds, this fund particularly, being used this way? Do any of you know of another instance in your career where the tax refund account was used for this purpose?
Sir, the administration's position is that it's an integrated system of the premium tax credits and the cost-sharing payments, and it's appropriate to make them out of the permanent appropriation. That's what the law is very clear that these payments shall be made. And so interpreting that statute, that's the conclusion that we came to.
And of all the thousands of federal programs out there, has any administration ever reached the conclusion that the tax refund account was the place to go to fund a program that it did not want to go to Congress and get its appropriation for?
So again, this is an integrated system of payments that are made to the insurance companies on behalf of individuals, and the administration believes it's appropriate they come out of the same account.
So, as a public policy moving forward, I would just challenge the witnesses, and from your standpoint and the positions that you hold, Congress considers this a breach of faith. It considers not just an illegal, unconstitutional act, but a breach of faith of what your duties are. And I would urge you, if you're ever presented with this situation again, whether the courts rule one way or the other, take this kind of action very seriously. Thank you.
Mrs. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Mazur, so let's just establish, first of all, you are the Treasury Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And is it fair to say that you're familiar with how tax credits and refunds work?
I'm familiar with a lot of parts of the tax law, yes.
Okay. So the ACA premium tax credit is paid out of a permanent appropriation given to the Treasury at 31 USC 1324, right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And that appropriation is set up to pay for other tax refunds and credits as well. Is that correct?
I believe it is a permanent appropriation to do so, yes.
Okay. Are sharing reductions a tax credit?
Ma'am, again, you need to go back to the Affordable Care Act as a whole and look at the cost-sharing payments and the premium tax credits as an integrated set of payments that are made.
Can you show me in the bill, in section 1402, where the cost-sharing reductions or tax credits are, excuse me, in CSR, in 1402 is where the cost-sharing is actually talked about. Can you show me in there, because you keep using this word integrated, and that's an assumption because I've read that section over and I'd like to know, maybe I'm not reading it correctly. Can you show me in there where it actually says that that is a cost-sharing reduction that goes back to a tax credit?
Ms. Black, I don't have that in front of me right now, so I really can't point to the language.
But if you keep on saying it's integrated, then you have to be able to report, you have to somewhere show me that there's not an assumption made here, because you keep using this word integrated. I can't find the word integrated anywhere in this section. So you keep using that word integrated when it is not in the law. Do you not have to abide by the law?
Ma'am, we're looking at the Affordable Care Act, and the intent of the law is that these payments are made to insurance companies, much like the premium tax credits are made.
Yes, the intent is that the insurance companies would reduce the cost. That's the cost-sharing reduction piece of this. It does not say in here, and again, I want you to point somewhere in this section that actually says that, because if that doesn't say that, and it's not clear, then what it does say is that should be an annual appropriation and not an appropriation that is a mandatory appropriation. Is that not a...
Congresswoman Black, I mean, I think you can look at this a somewhat different way. If Congress doesn't want the monies appropriated, they could pass a law that specifically said, do not appropriate the monies from that account.
That is not my understanding, sir, and you are an expert in this area. So what you're saying is if it is left without direction, that it can just be made a mandatory? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm saying that the Affordable Care Act, and I think the legal briefs that we referred to go through this, the Affordable Care Act directs the executive branch to make these cost-sharing reduction payments. And these payments are of a piece with the same payments that are made to the insurance companies under the premium tax credit, and that's justification for using the same account.
So the justification comes because the administration then decides that that's the way they want to do it, even though it is not stipulated in the law.
And frankly, if you would like to make the law clearer, you could pass an appropriation law that said do not make them.
Will the gentleman yield for 1 second?
I will yield.
Mr. Mazur, we discussed this point. It clearly articulates disbursements may be made from the appropriations made by this section only for refunds due from credit provisions in the Internal Revenue Code. That's Section 1324. What's unambiguous about that?
Again, sir, as we were talking about earlier, the legal interpretation of the administration is that Section 1324 of 31 U.S. Code allows for these cost-sharing payments to be made.
Only for. And it points out you asked Congress to give you direction. Congress gave you direction, and it said only for, and then told you what you could spend it on.
So
and then
Congress
you went
gave
beyond and spent it because you determined that you could spend it in an area that was not authorized by Congress.
So Congress gave direction to the executive branch in the Affordable Care Act to make these payments, to these cost-sharing reduction payments.
I'm reclaiming
to
my
help
time.
low-income individuals pay for their health care insurance.
And reclaiming my time, can you, and I know we're going to be out of time, but can you specifically show me where that authority is? Because I don't see that authority in this bill.
Congressman, but I don't have that in front of me, but I can take that back and get back to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Anasi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing and allowing me to attend and participate. I do believe one of Congress's most important roles is oversight, and it's important that we have this hearing. I'm trying to get a timetable here, and I'm noticing that in going back to some of the testimony, that HHS had actually requested almost $4 billion in funds at some point in time, early 2013, as part of the budget process. So it looks like they were looking to fund these dollars through the appropriations process. But at some point in time, OMB released a report, actually a 2014 sequestration report, that said that these funds would be subject to sequestration. And then I noticed that an HHS Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources, Ellen Murray, testified that she withdrew the request before the Senate Appropriations Committee released its appropriations bill in July 2013. So at some point in time, the administration was looking for money. At some point in time, the administration realized they couldn't get the money they needed through the appropriations process. It would be through sequestration. So then all of a sudden, at some point in time, the administration decided to look elsewhere. And it also appears then late in 2013 is when they started looking toward the premium credit account. The committee also heard testimony that the IRS Deputy CFO raised red flags about the administration's plan to make the cost-sharing reduction payments from the premium tax credit account in late fall. So there were red flags going up in late 2014. Mr. Mazur, did you personally know that the people at the IRS were concerned about this plan in the fall of 2013?
Not at that time, no.
You found out later?
I'm aware you've gone through the timeline right now.
Okay. Was anybody else in the Treasury aware of it at that time? Because, again, the IRS was throwing up red flags.
I can't speak for other people at the Treasury Department, sir.
We also understand that the former Chief Risk Officer was also concerned. He was worried the payments would violate the Constitution. Wow. Violate the Constitution and the Anti-Deficiency Act. You all know the Anti-Deficiency Act is a criminal law that prohibits government officials from making payments without an appropriation, so people were getting concerned. So the IRS General Counsel and OMB General Counsel arranged for 7 IRS officials to come to OMB and view the memo. The OMB General Counsel told them that they were not allowed to take notes or take the memo with them. Mr. Deach, is this common to have meetings like this where, you know, you can't take notes and you can't take the memo? It just seems unusual. Red flags are flying. We're going to have this meeting. Can't take any notes. Don't take the memo. Is this normal?
I wasn't here at the time, and I can't speak to the specifics of this circumstance, but as a general matter, I don't think it would be highly unusual for issues that are still under discussion to be considered by sharing the information in a memo, but not allowing materials to be brought
Mr. Deitch, just,
back.
I didn't hear. Did you say highly usual or highly unusual?
It would not be highly unusual to share information in this way.
But you're right. It wouldn't be highly unusual because it was an issue that was concerning people. We had red flags all over the place. The IRS is concerned. We have testimony the IRS officials got back to the IRS, the Chief Risk Officer and others, still worried about the payments violating the Constitution. Keep going back to violating the Constitution, which is really important about this hearing. So they asked to speak with Commissioner Costigan. Commissioner, do you remember that meeting?
I do.
Do you remember the IRS officials at that meeting told you that they thought the payments may violate the Constitution and Anti-Deficiency Act?
We had a full discussion of concerns about the Appropriate Appropriations Act, as well as our ability to monitor the payments and ensure there was an appropriate audit trail. The CFO's concern was as much about, if we had the authority, how would we make sure that there would be a sufficient audit trail? And all of those issues were ventilated. A chief counsel reported on the meeting at OMB. I did not realize that David Fisher had gone to that meeting, and that we had legal advice from OMB, and we had just received authorization and, in effect, a directive from Treasury to go forward. Our job is to administer the tax code, and we felt that, on balance, when we got through with the discussion, that we had the appropriate authority to proceed.
So at that meeting, there was also this action memorandum put in that I know one of my colleagues talked about, the memorandum between Mr. Mazur and Mr. Liu. And I'm not sure I got the answer from you.
I would just note that that memorandum was not at the meeting. It had just been issued The chief counsel reflected that he had received the memo, but I've never seen the memo until today.
Okay, so, but getting back to what so, Mr. Mazur, you authored this, and then you approved using these funds based on this memo. You approved using these funds, then, correct?
If you read the text of the memorandum, I recommended that that account be used for those funds. Yes, that's true.
So who made the final decision? Who approved?
Again, if you look at the memorandum, which you're holding in your hand, you can see that Secretary Liu approved the course of action.
So, Mr. Teacher, you said earlier, familiar with the Anti-Deficiency Act. If someone approves and authorizes expenditures of funds without appropriation, is that person in violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act? Pretty simple question. Yes or no? If somebody, I'm going to ask it one more time.
There is an appropriation for this, for the
someone approves and authorizes the expenditures of funds without the appropriation, is that person in violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act? Yes or no?
I'm not a lawyer, but it is my understanding that an appropriation is needed in order to make payments, and in the absence of the appropriation, it would be a violation of the Act.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you all. Let's do a little bit of cleanup. I'd like to talk a little bit about the legal justification, that is the 2013 memo. And you've sort of put us in a trick bag in a way, in that you've talked about the totality of a system, an integrated system. I think that was your word, Mr. Mazur, I'm not sure, but a holistic theme, basically. And yet, you've said, we've got all this, it's all written down, and it's all on a memo. We're just not going to share this integration, this revelation, this legal theory that came to us. Do you understand sort of the nature of the trick bag that you're putting the Congress and the American people in because you've not disclosed that information?
Sir, which 2013 memo are you talking about?
Talking about the OMB memo.
I'm not aware of that memo.
All right. How about your memo? Let's go to the one that you were just talking about, the January 15 memo. What's in the redacted part?
I don't recall what's under the redacted part, sir.
Come on. You don't recall that?
Come on. I write hundreds of memos.
Okay. Well, yesterday, you were on full display before the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Mazur. And in that committee, I was very impressed by your independent recollection of Section 385. Your ability to wax eloquent on chapter and verse and this and that. We've done this, Congressman. We've done that, Mr. Chairman. We've taken on this responsibility. You had details of process that were very, very impressive. And now on an issue that is absolutely pivotal, that is a fulcrum between the executive and the legislative branch, you say in this memo, I don't remember. Is that your testimony today?
That's correct, sir.
Is there anything that would refresh your recollection?
Not that I could think of, sir.
Did you prepare in any way for this hearing?
Sir, as you know,
did you prepare in any way for this hearing?
yes, I had some brief preparation.
What was the nature of your preparation, brief as it was?
I reviewed this memorandum.
You reviewed the memorandum?
With the redacted portion.
Oh, so that's all you did? Tell me what else you did.
The one that was provided to your committee. I also reviewed the 10-page...
When's the last time you saw the memorandum as you wrote it?
I really can't remember, but it probably would have been 2014.
So there's been nothing in 2 years that has prompted your recollection about your reasoning, about the ability to move forward on a program that brought a great deal of consternation and anxiety all throughout the administration, based on your own testimony, based on the red flags, based on one thing after another. There's nothing that you've done to refresh your recollection about that in the past 2 years. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Wow, that's remarkable. And that is in stark contrast to the hard work you've been doing on Section 385, where you had independent recollections. Is that right?
Sir, Section 385 regulations are proposed regulations. That's something that's ongoing. This is something that was done 2+ years ago.
How delightful to be able to move from one work product to another so quickly and so effortlessly. Let me turn everyone's attention, just so we're clear, on Section 1402, following up on what Mrs. Black was focusing in on. This is the exact language. So let's knock down this straw man argument that this is about poor people. This is not about poor people. This is about an insurance subsidy. And this is an insurance subsidy that the administration argued before the federal court. Here's the plain language, Section 1402. In this section, the Secretary shall notify the insurer of the plan of such eligibility, and the issuer, that is the insurance carrier, shall reduce the cost sharing under the plan at the level of the amount specified in subsection C, period, paragraph, end of letter. What that tells us is this is not about poor people. This is about making an insurance carrier gets a subsidy. So let's debunk the straw man argument. You can make a poor person argument as it relates to premium tax credit. You cannot, with any credibility, couch this, cloak this, masquerade this in some way as it relates to poor people on cost sharing reduction. It's an absurdity. Mr. Deitch, let me ask you a couple of questions. OMB wrote a memo to try and justify making the cost sharing reduction payments from the premium tax credit appropriation. That's right, isn't it?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you're aware that the committee has subpoenaed that memo, isn't that right?
I am.
And you're aware that OMB has not produced that, isn't that right?
I am.
And you're also aware, tell me you're aware of this, restore my hope that you're aware of this, that OMB has not given any legal justification for withholding the memo. You're aware of that, aren't you?
My understanding is that OMB continues to look for ways to provide the committee.
No, that's not my question. And let's just, listen, I'll be here all day. So let's just get right to the point. There has not been a legal justification that has been articulated by the Office of Management and Budget based on a legitimate subpoena from the United States Congress. There has been no privilege asserted. Is that right?
There's been no executive privilege asserted. That's correct.
So there is no legal justification based on your own admission for withholding that information. Isn't that right?
I'm not a lawyer and I can't address.
I'm not asking you to be a lawyer. And by the way, you're here. You're representing. So this I'm not a lawyer laminated hall pass that people want to use today, completely ridiculous. Then send a lawyer. Then send somebody who's equipped to answer these questions. These are not questions that are unanticipated, Mr. Deitch. It's the nature of the conflict that's between us. So do you have any other information today about the nature of the assertion that you're making? In other words, is there something that you know that is a legitimate reason as to why this information should be denied to the American people through their elected representatives in Congress? You got anything new?
OMB is committed to providing the information that the committee
Your
needs
commitment is waning and underperforming.
We're
Good
looking
grief.
You know, there are many instances in which the Congress and the executive branch
There's one memo.
together.
There's one memo, Mr. Deitch. There's one memo. It can't be that hard to find, and it seems to me you got either two choices. Either you say, here's the memo, or you say, we're not going to give it to you, and here's why we're not going to give it to you, because you don't have the legal justification to do it. You're being passive-aggressive, you're being an obstructionist agency, and it is outrageous. Do you know who wrote the memo?
I did not.
You didn't prepare to even understand who authored a memo, and you're here today representing OMB?
That's correct.
Are you aware that the Attorney General signed off on the memo?
I am not.
Mr. Baser, what happens at Treasury when you receive a document request from Congress?
I believe it goes to our Office of Legislative Affairs and then to our General Counsel's office to respond.
Is that the same thing that happens when you receive a subpoena, or is a subpoena treated differently?
I'm not aware. I think it's the same treatment, but I'm not aware of the exact.
Do you recognize a distinction between a letter, let's say, that Mr. Lewis and I would write together to the department making an information request, and a subpoena that is formally issued? Do you understand a legal distinction or appreciate the distinction between those two?
Yes.
What's the distinction?
I believe the subpoena is more of a compelling document.
what is your understanding of what the department's obligation is upon the receipt of a subpoena?
Sir, I understand that our staff has been working with your staff on these issues to try and give you information you need.
If what you're hearing from your staff is that your staff is doing a good job, your staff is misrepresenting what's happening. Because what we're hearing from our staff is that your staff is not doing a good job. Because you've not met a single deadline that the subpoena has put forward. And these are not unreasonable deadlines. I mean, let's be real. These are requests for documents, they are requests that the Congress is entitled to, and they're requests that you're denying. Isn't that right?
Sir, we provided you with numerous pages of documents.
And numerous pages is not zip.
Made many people available for transcribed
Numerous
interviews and
pages is meaningless. You know that, and I know that.
Sir,
What's your commitment today to comply with, in other words, you've got an opportunity to give a resounding yes to Chairman Brady on his request. Are you prepared to do that?
No.
And you're not willing to do that?
I'll take back the request to the department.
You'll take it back to the same staff, presumably, that has been representing what a great job they're doing? Is that who you're going to take it back to?
Take it back to the relevant staff who's responsible, sir.
Let me just make one final point.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I'll come to you. I'll make one final point.
We've been here for a while.
Listen.
And you're going over.
We're going to be here for a while. So,
Mr. Chairman, I don't plan to stay
listen,
here.
you don't have to stay here.
And I don't think it's fair for the witness to stay here. You want to subpoena all of them? You want to hold them in contempt?
Listen, I want to get answers. You want to get answers. Everybody wants to get answers. So let me just make one final point. There's been a lot of discussion at a high level today about the nature of the Constitution and what it means. And look, there's complicated issues that we're all dealing with and we're all walking through. But there's a real danger that I perceive that's being on full display here. And the danger is a level of presumption that says we will not be limited by the plain language of a statute, as Mr. Meehan was pointing out and as Mrs. Black was pointing out. The limitation, when we were invited by Mr. Mazur to correct a statute, Mr. Meehan pointed out, look, it says only. Only means only. There's not more than one way to interpret only. And there is this feeling, and I think it's on full bloom and full display today, and the feeling is this, that it's okay to cut down laws, it's okay to cut through things in cloaking ourselves in good intentions. It's a dangerous game, because if we accept this, then mark my words, there will come a day when there's going to be a different administration or a different disposition or a different attitude, and we're going to say, where were the people who should have stood up for these things at the time? My friends on the other side of the aisle, God bless them, the ACA is now orthodoxy, and it is jarring to them when it is challenged. This is not about the ACA. This is about a constitutional responsibility. Committee stands adjourned.